It was a cold December night in 1989 in the East German city of Dresden. The air smelled of smoke and fear. Outside the local KGB headquarters, an angry crowd had gathered. They were ordinary East Germans, drunk on the taste of freedom. The Berlin Wall had fallen a month earlier, and now they wanted the secret files inside this gray building. Inside, a young Russian officer named Vladimir Putin worked quietly. He was 37 years old, of medium height, with watchful eyes and thinning hair. While other officers shouted into telephones or burned papers in panic, Putin stayed calm. He loaded documents into a large metal incinerator, one by one. He did not rush. He had learned long ago that a spy who panics is a spy who dies. Putin had been living in Dresden for 5 years. His official job was director of the Soviet-German Friendship House, a cultural center. It was a good cover. Nobody suspected that the friendly Russian who organized concerts and language classes was actually a KGB intelligence officer. His real work was to recruit agents. He looked for people with access to Western technology, politics, or military secrets. He found them in bars, at conferences, in lonely offices. He studied them carefully, learning their weaknesses. Some needed money. Some wanted excitement. Some were simply afraid. Putin would offer them exactly what they needed, and in return, they gave him information. He was very good at this dark psychology. He understood that every human heart has a door that can be opened, if you only know which key to use. But on this December night, the door was his. The crowd outside pushed towards the building. Putin picked up the telephone and called the local Soviet army base for help. "Send soldiers," he said. "Protect the building." The voice on the other end hesitated. Nobody was coming. The mighty Red Army, which had terrified Europe for decades, was suddenly useless. Putin put down the phone. He felt something cold rise in his chest. It was not fear. It was a sense of betrayal. The Soviet Union, the country he had sworn to serve, was collapsing. The leaders in Moscow were weak. They were giving up without a fight. He thought to himself, "I will never be the one without power again." He walked outside alone. The cold wind cut his face. He faced the crowd with no weapon, only his voice. He told them, in perfect German, that the building was a military site and that guards inside had orders to shoot. His voice was calm, almost flat. The crowd hesitated. They saw a man who was completely sure of himself. They did not know he was bluffing. Slowly, they moved back. The moment was over. Putin had won. But something inside him had changed forever. That night, the KGB officer Vladimir Putin decided that strength was the only thing that mattered. Weakness was death. He would spend the rest of his life making sure he never stood helpless again. 10 years later, the world met a new Vladimir Putin. In 1999, he became Prime Minister of Russia, and soon after, President. People in Russia knew very little about him. He seemed to appear from nowhere, a quiet man in a gray suit. But the old spies in the Kremlin recognized one of their own. It was not just his background, it was how he listened. When you spoke, his pale eyes never left your face. He did not interrupt. He was storing away information like a human filing cabinet. The habits of the spy do not disappear when you get a new job title. As president, Putin began to surround himself with men from his old world. They were called the Siloviki, the men of power. Many had served with him in the KGB, in Dresden or in Leningrad. They understood the same language of loyalty and secrecy. Slowly, the Russian state began to run like a large intelligence network. Important information was shared only with a small inner circle. Everyone else was on a need-to-know basis. This was not a traditional government. It was a covert operation on a national scale. One evening, at a diplomatic reception in the Kremlin, a Western ambassador shook Putin's hand. The ambassador had also been an intelligence officer years ago. He made a friendly joke about the old days in East Germany. Putin's face did not change, but his eyes flickered with something sharp. He leaned in slightly. "The service teaches you one thing above all," Putin said, his English quiet but clear. "There is no such thing as a former spy. There is only a spy without a current mission." Then he smiled politely and moved away. The ambassador stood frozen, his champagne glass suddenly heavy. He understood the message completely. The president of Russia was not a retired spy. He was a spy who had simply moved to the biggest office in the country. To the public, Putin showed a completely different face. There was the tough judo fighter throwing opponents to the mat. There was the outdoorsman riding a horse bare-chested, fishing in a Siberian river. There was the stern father of the nation, promising to destroy terrorists in the outhouse. These were carefully produced images, legends in the spy's language. They were designed to make him look strong, healthy, and absolutely in control. But behind this mask, the real work continued in the shadows. In 2014, Putin's two worlds came together in Crimea. To the outside observer, it seemed like a sudden land grab, a quick decision made in anger. In reality, it was a textbook intelligence operation. Masked soldiers without any army badges appeared at key positions. They were called Little Green Men. The local media was quickly taken over. The political confusion in Ukraine was something Russian intelligence had been studying and encouraging for years. It was a beautiful piece of tradecraft, executed perfectly. Putin watched from Moscow, and the old Dresden case officer inside him must have felt a cold satisfaction. The plan had worked. Yet the double life demanded a price. Living permanently behind a mask is a lonely business. When you see every relationship as a potential source or a potential threat, you cannot truly relax with anyone. Even his closest political allies noticed the distance. Putin often sat at the end of extremely long tables during meetings, keeping his ministers far away. The joke in Moscow was that the length of the table was a measure of his trust, and that trust was in short supply. The spy's training teaches you that everyone is vulnerable. Everyone can be turned. How can such a man ever have a real friend? If the first part of Putin's life taught him to lie, the second part taught him that the best lie is one people want to believe. The president and the spy merged into one person so completely that nobody could separate them, not even Putin himself. He began to see the entire world as a chessboard of hidden operations. Diplomacy was just another form of intelligence work. An international summit was not a meeting. It was a field operation with a different uniform. His old KGB toolbox was updated for the internet age. The idea was simple. Western democracies were full of weaknesses. They had free speech, open arguments, angry voters, and a media that loved scandal. These were not problems to Putin. They were opportunities to exploit. He did not need to invade a country with tanks. He could send in ideas. He could make people argue, doubt, and turn against each other. The old spies called this active measures. Today we call it disinformation. The troll farms, the fake social media accounts, the secret funding of groups that pull societies apart, these are not random acts of mischief. They are the operational work of a man who spent his youth learning how to break people's loyalty. The darker side of this double life is violence. A real spy never forgets that his job, at its deepest level, is about life and death. When a former Russian agent named Alexander Litvinenko fled to London and began criticizing the Kremlin, he became a problem. In 2006, he drank tea laced with a rare radioactive poison. He died slowly in a hospital bed, his body falling apart. The message was not just for Litvinenko, it was for everyone watching. We can reach you anywhere. The method was so secret, so clever, that no clear proof could lead back to the Kremlin. Putin never spoke about it directly, but the look on his face when asked was a kind of answer. It was the quiet pride of an operation completed. As the years passed, Putin's isolation grew. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he governed from behind layers of glass and disinfection tunnels. Visitors had to pass through strange machines. The physical distance became a perfect picture of his inner life. He had always kept a distance from people. Now he could do it openly and call it safety. In a way, the pandemic suited him. It turned the whole world into a series of secure compartments, just like a spy network. In February 2022, Putin launched a full invasion of Ukraine. He called it a special military operation. That phrase is not from politics. It is straight from the KGB manual. A spetsoperacja is a secret mission, something done in the shadows with maximum impact and minimum clear responsibility. The war has been brutal and public, but the way the Kremlin controls its story, changing the reasons, denying the truth, calling real images fake, is pure tradecraft. A spy believes that truth is whatever you can make the target believe. If satellite images show mass graves, you say they are staged. If witnesses describe horrors, you say they are actors. Repeat the lie often enough, with enough confidence, and some people will accept it. That is the spy's art. Deployed now against the whole world. What does all this do to a man? The answer lies somewhere hidden in Putin's past. The young KGB officer who stood in that Dresden courtyard in 1989 learned a lesson that he has never unlearned. The world is dangerous. Power is the only safety. And letting go of control means death. So he cannot retire, not really. He cannot hand over power and sit in a garden, reading books. The mission has no end. There is always another target, another threat, another operation to run. Somewhere, perhaps in a locked drawer, there is an old red identification booklet from the KGB. It has a photograph of a serious young man with thin hair and eyes that tell you nothing. That booklet is a museum piece now, from a country that no longer exists. But the habits written into its pages, the mistrust, the manipulation, the endless patience, the belief that the world is a battle of deceivers, are not in a museum. They walk through the halls of the Kremlin every day. The young spy who faced a crowd with nothing but a bluff now commands armies and nuclear weapons. But inside, he is still that man, looking for the weakness in every person he meets, never coming in from the cold. In the end, Vladimir Putin's double life is not a story of two separate people. It is a story of a man who became his own mask. The president is the cover, and the spy is the reality. And a man who wears a mask for so long may one day find that the face underneath has disappeared, leaving only the mission, silent and endless, waiting for the next operation to begin.